All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started since it's just a couple minutes after, and we will still be monitoring for people who are coming in just a few minutes late, and we'll make sure we'll get the recording to them. So good morning, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us this morning for our live Q&A with Terry Himes from NASA JPL. This weekend is our 7th annual Dark Sky Festival, where we are bringing the stars to you. This is the 7th annual festival, but this is the very first time we've done this virtually. And Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been here since the very first festival, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I think it was one of the first, yeah.
One of the firsts. Yeah. And so it's always nice when we're doing something new to see a familiar face, and Terry is definitely someone that has brought life to our festival and has kept us connected to the stars. And I can't think of a better person to help bring the stars to everybody throughout this festival. So thank you so much, Terry, for joining us. Can you tell us, before we get into the Q&As, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of introduce yourself to everybody listening today?
Okay. So I work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. I've been working on Mars projects since 1990, believe it or not. The Mars Observer was the first project I worked on. And we at JPL, we do so many missions, and I've gone through many different areas of those missions. I was the GDS team chief, then I went into sequencing. I was a sequencing team chief for a while. Then I got into the spacecraft teams, and I'm always wanted to get closer and closer to the spacecraft so that I could be more and more involved with the spacecraft itself. And then also being multi-mission, we have 24 flying missions. So we have a lot of missions going out there. But of course, I love Mars. I kind of always have loved Mars since I was a little kid. But and then the Mars Observer literally was in my backyard in Princeton, New Jersey, being built. And that's when I got started. I guess it was meant to be. So
Right.
and I've been at JPL, so I've worked on JPL missions since 1990, but I only started working direct at JPL in 2001, actually. So I was a contractor before that. But it's been a great ride. I love everything that we do. I love JPL, obviously. And we do so many exciting things, and things are happening every day. That's why we come back to Dark Sky Festival every year, because there's always new stuff. So when I talk to Katie, we don't really rehash any old stuff. Normally we're doing something new, and there's some new missions going on. So always something exciting. So, and everybody should go to our website, jpl.nasa.gov. Lots of cool information there. All the missions are there. There's terabytes of data and images you can look at. It's just fascinating just to get there to the website. So I encourage everybody to go there as well. So that's it. That's the intro.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I think, Gary, you hit the nail on the head. That's one thing I love about you coming back to the festival year after year, because nothing is stagnant at NASA. I feel like there are just so many things happening, and every year I get so excited about all the possibilities, and I'm still excited about the last presentation of all the things that had happened. And I'm always shocked about how much happens between when I see you every year for the Dark Sky Festival and to the next festival. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I only talk about the engineering side. The science side is even more fascinating. And it's really odd at JPL because they're really quite separated. And the science people live in their own worlds. And when you have people come and talk about science, and I love going to those because I learn more. Even though I'm helping them bring the science, I really don't get the feedback. It was only on the Dawn mission that the scientists came in about every month and gave us a presentation on what they've discovered. Like, for instance, I was on Dawn and we were at Ceres, and they found out that Ceres is pretty much a living asteroid. It is like a planet. It is 50% water. And that huge crater called Akator, and that upwelling of the sodium carbonate, that white stuff, is caused by water, and there's a lot of groundwater in there. So now they're going to think about sending a lander there because, well, there's water, there could be other stuff. So it's amazing like that.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So the scientists come back and tell us the results of a lot of other stuff. but not everyone does. They're off because they're always really busy and going off to the next project. We, as engineers, don't get that feedback as much as we would like, because it's kind of like nice to see the fruits of all of that, getting the spacecraft there and operating it safely and all of that. So anyway,
Absolutely.
so the science side of it is just amazing. And I know, Katie, you have science people that come up and talk into our sky.
Yeah, I love the blend of engineering and the science. It's so fun to get both perspectives.
Yeah.
And just because of just the feat it takes to send something to somewhere else, you know, like with Mars Perseverance, to send something to a different planet. And then we talked about during the last interview about just how exciting all that data is that we're going to get. Right. And it's really fun to see this beautiful like molding between the science and the engineering. So Terry, thank you again so much for chatting with us today. And we're going to open it up for some questions for people that have watched the presentation that we filmed just a few weeks ago. So that way people can ask the questions that they might be having about the stars. And that's what I love about this live Q&A session. When we're bringing the stars to other people, they can continue to do their own exploration from home. And we'll just ask everybody that when we open it up for questions, if you can please keep yourself muted until you have a question. And once you're done asking your question, go ahead and mute yourself again. And if you have a question, please make sure to wait for that kind of natural pause. We're going to try not to walk on each other or interrupt anybody. And we would also love for you to introduce yourself before asking your questions. We want to know where you're calling in from and get to know you a little bit as well. And if you don't want to talk, I understand that talking in front of other people can be scary sometimes, and that's totally okay. You can pop a question into a chat. We've got people monitoring the chat feed, and we'll ask that question for you. So if you don't want to talk, no worries. Just pop it into the chat, and we'll get to that question as soon as we can. And again, just being patient. I'm sure that lots of people have lots of questions, so just be patient with us and with each other, and we'll try to get through all of these questions. We're gonna kind of keep in here for probably about a max 1 hour. We'll go shorter if we need to. If we need to go a little bit longer, that's fine too. If we're just super excited and want to trap Terry all day, but we'll shoot for about an hour. But if we need to go a little bit shorter, a little bit longer, we will make those adjustments as we go. So at this point, I do want to open it up if anybody wants to start us off with a question today.
I can always be bribed with beer too, Katie, just for a minute.
Hey, Terry, I'm wondering, this is Christy from Three Rivers, and I'm just wondering, what is your favorite mission that you've ever worked on, and why was it your favorite?
Oh, that's a great question. You know why? Because it has to be the current mission that you're working on. Because like Katie was saying too, every mission brings something new, but the most exciting one is always the current one we're working on. So yeah, Mars 2020, because every year, or every time we launch, not every year, but every time we launch, there's new science, there's new payload, but there's also new challenges. That's what every engineer dreams of, is the hard problems that you run into. So yeah, I have to say, I'll say two things really to answer that. Number one's the first mission I worked on, which is the Mars Observer, because all of a sudden I was doing exactly what I wanted to do since I was 14 years old, like get involved in deep space mission. So that was, and then the most current mission, which is Mars 2020, which is going to have a helicopter on it. I mean, we've never done that before. There's so much new science in the payload that they have. It's going to look for, it's going to detect radiation on the surface even more than we've done before. But it's going to look for, organics and all sorts of things. So yeah, it has to be the last mission. The current mission I'm working on is probably the best, but they're all exciting. I mean, we flew through the tail of a comet. I've had 2 return to Earth missions, Stardust and Genesis. Those were unique because I got to go out to Dugway Proving Ground, where I actually landed both of those capsules. And Genesis was actually supposed to be hooked by a helicopter. So I was out there I think, in 4 different ORTs, operational readiness tests there, where we practiced the helicopters hooking the parasail and bring it. So that was really exciting. And watching that capsule come through the atmosphere, it's just amazing. We had a aircraft that was actually about 40,000 feet and actually saw the capsule as it enters our Earth atmosphere. So the sample returns definitely on the top of my list. And just to let you know, it's not a JPL mission, but very exciting is OSIRIS-REx. And it's at Bennu now, and it's going to be doing a sample within the next few days. It's actually a Goddard mission, and we're all competitive. The NASA centers are all competitive, so I'm kind of promoting another NASA's mission, but center's mission. But the OSIRIS-REx is going to be is actually pretty amazing, and that's going to be a return to Earth, but it's like 2025 or something, way out there. But anyway. That's the way it is. The most current one is always the most exciting.
Thank you so much, Terry.
Yeah, thanks. Anything else? Come on, you gotta stump the professor here.
Hey Terry, my name's Tamara. I'm down in Ventura, and I was lucky enough to meet Scott Carpenter before he passed away. He was a really nice guy, and I'm wondering if you have any special friendships or relationships with any of the more well-known astronauts.
I do not, and here's the reason why: is we don't do any human spaceflight at all, but we do get involved a little bit because we have instruments and things like on ISS and that type of place. But as far as the astronauts and human spaceflight, we are not connected very much with that at all. So I haven't. But I have to say, at Dark Sky, there have been astronauts that Katie's gotten to come to Dark Sky, and there's been others where I talk that come in and we meet and we talk, and so it's a lot of fun. The one astronaut that I did have a pretty good relationship with was Sally Ride. Now, Sally Ride, I worked with her. She was the very first woman astronaut. Amazing. She's an amazing woman. But the one thing she was involved with is getting more young girls involved in science and technology. And I was a single father raising a daughter. So we had an immediate connection. And she was down at UCSD, and she was working on the Grail project with me. Now, the Grail spacecraft is actually 2 spacecraft, and they were doing the gravity analysis of the moon. There's a mission here on Earth. It's called GRACE, and there's 2 spacecraft that fly with each other that are communicating. So they go through the mass of Earth, and they figure out all the gravity. So we're doing Grail, and we had 4 cameras, but she would have all of her students dial in and be able to pick what craters they want to image on the moon and then send command. Now, I wrote all the software to interface to take the commands the kids were putting in and create real spacecraft commands and send them up to Grail so they could image that crater when it came over the next time. So I got to work with Sally Ride. So she was the most famous. The nice thing she did for me was she did a bunch of children's books, and so she signed a bunch of them for me, and I gave them to my grandsons. And I told them hang on to them because those are valuable. But she was amazing. She was a super nice, very energetic person, and is just as nice as can be. Just super person. So I loved her, really did. So that's the only connection I have to human spaceflight.
That's wonderful. That's a special relationship. Thank you.
Yeah, and getting young girls involved. I talked to her a lot about that because I raised my daughter, and my daughter was great, and I mean she fantastic math grades and everything. But when it seems that when young girls get into the teenage years, all of a sudden they have lots of other interests, right? So and so she was trying to figure out, well, how do we keep young women interested in science and technology? And she was always working hard on that. So I loved her for that because I mean we need people, we need everybody, men, women, everybody.
For sure, and it seems like she was a little ahead of her time with the STEM movement hadn't really taken off
right
back then. So that's great.
she was one of the innovators of all that. She really was. Yeah. If you look at all her work, it was really great. So I'm glad she devoted her talent and her time to do that. So. I saw. Is there any chats, Katie?
Yeah, Terry, we actually do. We have one from Jim W. They ask if does any of the JPL technology transfer to manned space flight?
Ooh, yeah, in a lot of different ways. So if you think back, probably a lot of you are too young to live through the Apollo days like I did, but before Apollo, in the 60s, JPL sent 7 spacecraft that both orbited and flew by. Well, first of all, the first spacecraft was just to impact the moon. It took us 6 tries to impact the moon. That's how little we knew about navigating at that time in the 60s. Deep space navigation, even though the moon isn't deep space. But it took us 6 tries. We finally hit the moon, and which is why we have those peanuts, by the way. If you see those in the rooms when we have events, they had peanuts there the day we actually hit the moon. So the peanuts are always there for every mission. You'll see them on camera when you see an event. I lost my train of thought. So remind me what I got off track with the peanuts. What was the question?
The question was, does any of the JPL technology transfer to manned spaceflight?
Sorry, started talking about the peanuts, got off on a totally different track.
No worries.
So the spacecraft that we send in advance of any human spaceflight is gathering all the information we need for doing any sort of human involvement whatsoever. Number 1, is it safe? Number 2, can we land there? Obviously, you have to land, get boots on the ground, that type of thing. And you have to bring back that science. So that's what Apollo did. We had all those surveyors that landed on the moon. Now on Mars, we've had a lot of landers since 1996 was the roll. Well, no, 1977 was the 2 spacecraft that we landed on Mars. And then there's a big bathtub where the Mars Observer came along, and we started again with the Mars program in a different way and funded differently. But this is all a precursor to hopefully to get men to Mars. But we have to remember it's very dangerous for 2 reasons. Number 1, the radiation. I keep squawking that. There's a lot of radiation. We got to solve that problem. And the one-way light time can get as long as 20, 24 minutes, I think, sometimes. So the one-way light time. So astronauts, if something happens, you're basically on your own for 20 minutes or the round trip, of course. So it's a much bigger project to get men to Mars, or men and women to Mars, humans to Mars. So that's how we're involved in it. Now there are small programs that JPL do get involved, but not as much as you might think. We do a lot of more management type of things, only because we've done spacecraft that's gone to the moon or to Mars. But other than that, not too much interaction with the human spaceflight. Sorry to say. And it's a whole different thing too. And the budgets are much bigger, by the way. Huge budgets. Good question.
Awesome. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, so we actually have another one from the chats. This one is from Bob G, and they're asking what's happening to mitigate risks Starlink poses to maintaining dark skies.
So mitigate the risk of, would you say Starlink?
Starlink, yeah, the satellite system that's getting sent up by a non-NASA entity.
Oh, I don't know much about that, unfortunately. So, so to mitigate the risk of Starlink?
Yeah, it's going to be my understanding is it's going to be a network of telecom satellites that are going to just network through the sky. And a lot of astronomers are worried about it interfering with dark sky observations on the ground.
I see what you're talking about. Okay, yeah. So the more and more spacecraft we send up, that I wish I had that. I actually have an animation of all of the spacecraft that's orbiting Earth, and it's actually amazing. Katie, I'll send you that link. It might be a good one to put on the website. what it shows is kind of a 3D view of all the spacecraft that's orbiting Earth right now. So there's a lot. There is a lot. I can't remember the number, but there's a lot of spacecraft orbiting. So mitigating the risks, that's out of my purview. So I really can't answer that very intelligently because I don't know too much about it. So sorry about that. But I will give Katie a link so you can see. Maybe on that website also it will be some more information about that as well. So that's about all I know.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll make sure to get that link from Terry.
Okay.
And post that on our Sierra Night Skies page on our Facebook.
Yeah.
So it's called Sierra Dark Skies. We'll go ahead and get that from Terry, post that up. And then Bob, too, just as a follow-up to your question, that is a question that we're starting to get a lot here in the parks when we take people out at night. And I would recommend going to the International Dark Sky Association website, which is darksky.org, where they are actually talking about that. And it's a great resource to talk about the preservation of dark skies.
Yeah. I know they have a lot of presentations about just light in general and how it affects, viewing telescopes and that type of thing. So the light pollution is a very valid concern.
Absolutely. Right. Does anybody else have any questions for Terry Himes here? You can pop them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask them.
Yeah, anything you want. Anything. If I don't know, I'll just say I don't know, and I'll get you information because I do have a lot of resources, so I can reach out to.
Hello, Terry. This is Rebecca. I'm up in the giant forest in Sequoia National Park right now.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
I hear that a lot. I will say the air is still unhealthy up here, so you might be better where you are. Yeah. But I was just curious about your own, about when we turn the James Webb Telescope on and we start to see some of this old light from the early universe. Is there any one question you're most excited about looking into, or just what kind of aspects of the early universe you're most looking forward to learning about?
Wow, there is so much. I've been really fixated on black holes lately and LIGO and the gravity waves. It's just it fascinates me to no end to how much science we're going to get out of the LIGO and the gravity waves, and how many black holes are actually out there that we can't, in brown dwarfs that we can't even see. So the James Webb Telescope is just going to look so far back, and the cosmic microwave background is something that I hope they're going to be able to get more information about, and that's going to tell us a lot more about the beginning. The Big Bang. There's that period, what they call the dark period, where they don't really know what happened there. They're doing a lot of experiments, but to be able to, this is done at CERN as well, the Large Hadron Collider. So we start doing experiments here on Earth, but also looking further back, and getting those two pieces put together is going to be fascinating. So yeah, cosmic microwave background, I'm sure we're going to find out a lot more about that, a lot more about how many black holes there really are and how big they are. I mean, there's some massive stars out there too that are just unbelievable. We talked about a couple of years ago, at least 2 or 3 years ago, I have a presentation on how the universe began. And when James Webb gets up there, we're going to get so much more information. It's going to be amazing. So it's an exciting time, and I hope everybody tunes into it and stays on top of it. And I think the scientists are going crazy right now. They're really getting anxious to get that thing up there. And I hope everything works well. I'm crossing my fingers. So those are the main things that I'm really curious about.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Giant black holes and giant stars are definitely super cool.
Amazing. Just absolutely amazing. And to know what's going to happen to our solar system eventually. I mean, our star is going to turn into a white dwarf probably. And, it's a long ways away, but it's kind of fun to think about all that. There are no bad questions, so throw them out there.
I got another one from the chat for you, Terry.
Okay.
This one comes from Jack G. They are wondering what your favorite part of working on these missions is.
Ooh, what's my favorite part about working on these missions? Well, it's fun. I'm an engineer, so when there are problems, that's a lot. Believe it or not, as stressful as it is, it's a lot of fun. Because usually, for instance, we've had 3 safe modes on MSL. I haven't been a part of the teams solving those problems, but I do know when the spacecraft has an anomaly of some sort, everybody jumps in, and of course we kind of wean it down to just the experts that work on the problem. But I think it's the engineering part of that, and flying the spacecraft. There's a lot more involved than people think, and I love talking about that part of it because it's the most exciting part. I mean, how all those things come together. There are the spacecraft team is kind of the top of the pyramid, but there's all those subsystems underneath it: navigation, telecom, attitude control, reaction wheels, power, thermal. So all of those systems are all working together and providing information to help fly the spacecraft. And it's just a lot of fun just flying the spacecraft itself. That's probably the most exciting part of it. It's something you do every day and every week. It's like a cycle. You get all your telemetry down, all your engineering telemetry, you analyze it, all the subsystems analyze it, and they say, well, this is what we got to do next week. And then there's all these special events, like Odyssey, for instance, is going to go through a cold reboot. Now, that doesn't sound bad. You reboot your computers all the time, right? But you're rebooting a computer that's orbiting Mars, and you don't know what's going to happen. So it's very, very, everything has to be analyzed down to the second. So doing an event like that is a lot of fun to work on too. It's very, it's kind of stressful, and there's a lot to do. There's a lot of work to do. All the teams have to pull together. But every spacecraft has that. You go into safe mode when there's anomalies. So yeah, it's just exciting flying the spacecraft in general. That's why I've always wanted to get closer to the spacecraft. Ground data system was fun. It did all that. Sequencing and building commands and testing commands and sending them up. The spacecraft team is even more involved in the overall systems aspect of the spacecraft. So a lot of fun flying the spacecraft. Now from my home, so which is even more amazing. Did I answer the question?
I believe so.
Okay.
And if you're ready for the next one, we have one, another one from the chat from Chris C. from Minnesota. And they are asking, what was one of the most challenging events or problems encountered by one of the rovers, and how did they fix or work around it?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is Spirit. Spirit got stuck many years ago, and we were doing autonomous driving. And I do remember I got a call one evening, and it said we need to do forward link commanding, and it's not working. My software is part of doing forward link commanding. What forward link commanding is that from Earth here, we build the commands and we send them up. But if you can't get to the rover, then you have to send the command to an orbiter, and then the orbiter sends it down to the rover when the overflight occurs. So the orbiters are going over the landers about every 2 hours, and usually they're in polar orbits for science reasons. I won't explain right now, but they're doing a polar orbit, and they're going over every 2 hours. So an Odyssey overflight was coming up, and the Spirit rover team said we can't connect to the command system to build the command to do this forward link commanding because something's wrong. And so I came in to work on that, and I found out that they hadn't done an update, and we updated it really quick, and we got the commands up. Well, what was happening is they got some telemetry down from the rover, and they usually, back then, this is just when after they had landed, maybe 3 years after they landed, I think, how they detected where they were going is the number of wheel rotations. And they noticed that they were doing wheel rotations, but they weren't going anywhere. Nowadays, these new rovers, by the way, they cameras look at the horizon so that they know that the wheel rotations are moving, but also the horizon is moving, or some fix, like you would do if you were like a scout or something, and you're shooting an azimuth and you're looking at a point that you want to hike to or whatever. Same thing in the rovers. We're looking at a point, and then we take the wheel rotation, saying, okay, we're moving. So if you do autonomous driving, you have to do things like that. And then telemetry comes down, you look at that. So Spirit, we noticed the Spirit was stuck, something's going on, but they had to shut it down. That was the main thing. They wanted to send commands up to the orbiter and have them forward link command down to the rover and say, stop what you're doing. And so they can analyze. So what had happened, it had dug itself in. Of course, we never did get it extracted. It took us, we spent about 3 months trying to do what we could do to get Spirit unstuck, but it was stuck. And that was it. It was stuck in a position where it was facing more northerly. And so during the long Martian winter, which is twice as long as ours, because Mars has year on Mars is 683 Earth days. So it basically lost power over time, and of course, it became a lander at that point. So that was one of the biggest. What a big challenge!
That sounds like a big challenge.
Yeah.
We've got another question for you, Terry. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So this comes from Greg R. from Connecticut. And he says that he is an engineer, and he says he sees a guitar in your background. Oh. And has always noted that the most talented engineers also have a strong background in art or music. And his question is, has that been something that you have observed as well?
Yeah. So I always encourage kids that take up music of some sort. Now, why? It doesn't matter. So what it does, music, especially if you really get interested, I started out as a drummer, by the way. So, and my neighbors convinced me it'd be a good idea if I learned guitar. So yeah, I was a drummer for many, many, many years, but I always wanted to learn guitar, and I was in a band, of course, and all that. But I did notice that if you're in music and you learn, if you really like what you're doing, you're playing the instrument you like, no matter what instrument it is, you have to practice a lot. So it starts getting you, as kids, it starts getting them really good study habits, right? Because they have to practice. Same thing with studying, got to study. So I think musicians have a little bit of an edge there. If they're already practicing, studying, you get better skills for studying and practicing. But also music, there's a lot of studies going on nowadays. I just went to one at UCSD a couple years ago that says people who are musically inclined and played music all their life have lower incidence of dementia and that type of thing, like mental things too. So I thought that was pretty interesting, but they're trying to get enough studies done so they could see what kind of a connection that was. And of course, when it comes to the brain, I mean, it's really tough to really see if there's a connection. But yeah, typically, I seem to, or I know at JPL, there's just about all the engineers have some sort of musical. It seems like they do anyway, have musical background. So yeah, I've always loved music. I was in band, so I was shooting rockets up with mice in them, and I was playing in bands. So I ended up doing those two things in high school. It's pretty much my high school.
All right, we've got another question from Bob G. And
hey, Bob.
Bob asks, I heard that Voyager's 1970s plutonium-based nuclear reactor led to extras sitting on the shelf and maybe collecting some dust. Then they were dusted off, recertified, and used in early 2000 Mars rovers. Is that accurate?
I don't think so. I don't know. So I'll say I don't know, but it sounds improbable. Except for this one little thing, is that we don't have enough plutonium-238. So plutonium-238 is non-weapons grade plutonium, and we do use it in the power supplies for Curiosity. Well, Curiosity, and now Mars 2020. InSight has solar arrays, of course, and the two rovers before that had solar arrays. So I'm not really sure that if that's true or not, but it's possible. It's possible. So I'll give you a little. First of all, it's called an RTG, and for the new ones, called an MRTG, which is multi-mission radioisotope thermoelectric generator. So if you memorize that, you'll be really popular at your science club meetings. So the RTGs have very little plutonium-238, but it's actually packed in ceramic plates. And the reason they pack it in ceramic plates is because they want to make it survivable in case something happens during launch and it goes into the ocean of some sort. Nothing can really destroy that. And they actually test it by baking that plutonium-238 into those ceramic plates and then shooting them out of cannons against brick walls to make sure that they don't separate. So that's how protected it is. So I'm not sure, but here's what could be true. There could be a little bit of plutonium-38. We have very little, and usually I think we buy most of our plutonium from Russia, actually, because our the energy department got rid of all the plants. We're building a new plant so we can produce it. I don't know if it's online yet, but so we weren't producing it for many years. So there could have been some leftover stuff that we're going to use. So that part of it could be true, that what little stockpile we have of plutonium-238 might have survived since then, and maybe that's what they use. That's possible. So, but that's I'm guessing. Educated guess.
Nice. Thank you, Terry. We have one question coming from Gary R. in Kingsburg, California. And they ask, it's a two-parter. They ask, what is the long-term vision for humans on Mars? And what is one of the biggest hurdles to get to that vision?
So I'm probably, again, human space flight is not much that we're involved in too much. So you probably know as much as I do as far as that goes. I mean, the challenge just to get there is really a big part of it, because just the technology that we have to come up with to make that survivable by humans. Once you get outside of our magnetosphere, which is about 1 million miles around Earth, you have to deal with radiation. So that's going to be one of the big challenges, is to try to mitigate that problem when we get to Mars. And also the longer the trip and the longer you stay there, the more exposure you're going to have to that radiation. So before we go there, that has to be definitely mitigated. But I think they really, one of the things that InSight's trying to do, we just put a lander there that has a seismometer and what we call a mole, but it's a heat probe, which is digging down now. We've been fairly successful in getting it pretty deep. So we're trying to figure out what happened to Mars. So I think the biggest objective is to get samples and bring them back to Earth as well. So we have a couple things going on. We have the human space flight to Mars, of course, but we also have a sample return mission that's going to happen as well. So I think the sample return will probably happen before the human space flight will be done. But the objective, from my perspective, and there might be a lot of other things out there, but from my perspective, the objective is, what the heck happened to Mars? I mean, there was obviously water, oceans, and lakes, and all sorts of crazy stuff on Mars. We know that because we can see the evidence of it, and pretty, 100%. There's a lot of water there. We're going to the greater Jezero crater is a delta flowing into that crater that we're going to land in for Mars 2020. And we're going to find out some amazing science there. And it's going to, again, tell us that, yes, there's a lot of water there. So what happened to that? Why did Mars lose its magnetosphere, which protects us, but also protects us from the sun? And the sun just strips away the atmosphere. So if we can solve those questions, we'll know what's happening here on Earth too. So I think those are the biggest objectives, is from what I know. I mean, other people have other objectives. As far as terraforming Mars and doing all of that, I think that's very futuristic and I think fairly improbable. But I think just finding out the science of what happened on Mars is really the very first objective.
Such an exciting question. I think it's a question on a lot of people's minds, like, oh, what is the possibilities there?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
All right, we've got another question from Jim W. from Santa Ana. And he asks, how do you test the deep space technology just with the previous step-by-step missions, similar to how you described earlier with the Apollo missions?
Oh, how you test them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a big question. So we're all about testing. Everything is tested before we launch, of course. So if I could break it down into phases, we'll call it the development phase right up until launch. There is testing going on with the spacecraft itself, and they have what they call an incompressible test list. Now, what does that mean? That means that when you have a budget, let's say you want to fly to Mars and you want to do certain science, and we have what we call discovery missions where our vendors build the spacecraft, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Orbital, Ball Aerospace, those vendors build spacecraft, and they give it a budget and let's say it's 500 million. If you're hitting problems and you're running what we call hot on the budget, they're going over budget. Well, what usually gets eliminated? Well, testing gets eliminated. That because you're pushing it. If you remember this is way back when Daniel Golden was head of NASA, he coined the phrase "faster, better, cheaper." We find out that's not really good. That means that some testing doesn't get done when you're pushing the schedule and the budget. What gets squeezed out is the testing. So we have what we call an incompressible test list, things you absolutely have to do or you're not going to launch, period. So that happens right up until launch. Now, you have to remember that all the people building that spacecraft are not the people who are going to be flying it. The people who are flying it now start to doing their tests. Like right now for 2020, March 2020, we're going through 9 ORTs up until February 18th when we land. Those ORTs are operational readiness tests for the operational people to now start testing their skills and testing the software and testing how they're going to do service operations when they get there. So all of that. So you have parallel things. Now we're flying a spacecraft. We're actually flying a spacecraft in cruise phase now, going towards Mars. And now we have people doing testing in parallel. And so we have to be very careful that nothing we're doing in testing in these ORTs bleeds over to the operational side of things. If we're using the same, we have to keep things separated. We want to use real data, but we want to keep it separated, make sure nothing happens. So that testing is going on as well. So a lot of testing, everything is tested. We don't do anything unless it's tested and certified. As you can imagine, there's a lot of test procedures that have to be followed. They have to be written. They have to be approved. You have to go through what they call TRRs, which are test readiness reviews, where everybody comes in and then they picks apart your testing and said, you sure you thought about this? You sure you thought about that? So it's tough environment when you're doing testing, and everybody's involved in testing. So it's everybody is scrutinizing everything you do. You have to have a paper trail of all of that. You have to have the test procedures that match the requirements. You have tons of documents that says this is what you're supposed to be doing. And then you have testing that says now you got to test that to prove that what you're doing is what you're doing. Called validation and verification, V&V. There's a whole group of people that that sits on top of that and makes sure that you're doing all of those things. So that's testing. I mean, that's then there's the one really, 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 really important thing that you have to have, and that's a flight software test bed. Now you have a test bed in flight ops, but you also have a flight software test bed, which has the actual, and then you have what we call Perseverance now has a rover buddy. What do they call that? I'll think of it in a second. At JPL, which will be our test rover at JPL, and it'll be in the Mars yard. So to test commands, we'll go over there. We'll test them here on Earth using the rover buddy. I wish I remember the name of that. And then before we send the commands up to the rover. So that flight software test bed is extremely important because it is the spacecraft model of what's actually flying. So we have on Earth hopefully the exact same model of what's actually on Mars at that time, or orbiting Mars, or the lander on Mars, or rover. So so that's our test bed here on Earth. Very important. And then when we send commands, every command that gets sent up to either rover, lander, or orbiter, all has to be tested here on Earth and go through what we call command verification and validation, and make sure all the flight rules have been applied. In other words, if you're an orbiter, you don't turn the high gain antenna to the sun and let it burn up. So there's flight rules that have to be, when you build the commands, they have to make sure that all the commands that you send to the spacecraft are safe. So they get tested. We go through a command approval meeting, and then the mission manager signs off on it. Then the next uplink opportunity, we uplink it to the spacecraft. So that's what we do, sort of tying that into what the spacecraft team does. We even test commands on a daily basis to send up to the spacecraft. So. Katie, tell me if I'm getting long-winded.
No, that's okay. We have about 10 minutes left. And I know there's still a lot of questions in the chat, everybody. And what I'll do is I'll try to get these. We're going to wrap up with just one more question, actually.
I can say, by the way.
Okay. And we actually have to prep for other Q&As and stuff later today. So how about we'll do this? We'll do 2 more questions. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and wrap up. And the first question comes to us from Susan M. And she says, Terry, it's such a pleasure to hear you. And she said that you mentioned the Big Bang. And she is curious if you have any favored ideas on what existed prior to the Big Bang.
Nothing. No ideas. Nothing existed before the Big Bang. But it does spark your imagination, though, doesn't it? Like, well, what could have been before that? But I mean, that time began then for us. So yeah, all those theories out there, like multiple universes, and those theories, they're all theories, by the way, are all very fascinating. But yeah, so I think that'll never be answered, to be honest. I don't think you'll ever answer that question. So you can ponder as much as you want and come up with your own ideas, actually. But I don't think it'll ever be answered because we only know what we can see, what is presented to us by the electromagnetic spectrum. So yeah, everybody's going to have ideas. I don't think that'll ever be known. I'll try to keep my answers short because that's a big one.
All right. Thanks, Terry. So we have our last question is going to come from Chris Kane. And they ask, what is the coolest tool or device on the rover, and which one provides the most information?
Oh, well, the most information is almost impossible to answer that. So I'll give you that answer right away. I mean, they're all going to produce incredible amounts of information. I think it's Moxie is going to be the most exciting experiment. Besides the helicopter. the helicopter is not an experiment. It's actually a discovery, what we call an engineering discovery to see if we can do it. If it works, it's going to be really exciting. And it's definitely going to be our scout that's going to help us look ahead a little bit on the rover. But I think the most exciting experiment on board this rover is MOXIE. I think it's called MOXIE. It's for trying to convert oxygen. That is going to be very exciting to see if we can extract and create oxygen on Mars. That's very important, obviously, for manned exploration. Let's see, there was another one too. If I think of it, I'm trying to think. I'm going through all the instruments, trying to think. Well, the one that's going to be really exciting is that they sent up different fabrics to see which one is the best for abating radiation as much as possible. So, and I forget, there's a real long name of one of them it's nanotube technology, which is actually going to help with trapping radiation. So those two experiments, I think, are going to be real exciting because we'll find out a lot more information about how we can actually safely go to Mars if we want to send men and women there. So, good questions. All of them great questions. Yeah, we could do a long time, can't we, Katie? We could go on.
Oh my gosh. That's what we found out when we were recording the interview. We could have just talked for hours. It was awesome.
Yeah, there's so much to discuss. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we want to thank everybody so much for joining us today and asking such great questions. And Terry, thank you again for sharing your passion with us and for giving us a glimpse into everything that's happening at JPL and what we're expecting with Mars. And I just think it's so awesome that that we named this rover the Perseverance.
And it's going to land February 18th.
Yes, we have just a couple more months until it lands on February 18th.
Amazing.
And what a great thing to look forward to bring us out of this year is this amazing thing that's going to happen on February 18th. And I'm reminded about the definition of what it is to persevere. And it's doing something despite difficulty. And it seems like even though there's all these hurdles for us to continue to go to understand a different planet like Mars and go deeper into space, that we keep moving forward. And I just want to say thank you so much, Terry, for being part of that great work and sharing that great work with us. And we can't wait to have you back in the parks, hopefully next summer, and we can hear just that much more about what NASA and JPL are doing and the missions that you're involved in.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great. I'm always happy to come and talk with everybody, and I love all the questions, and I hope we continue to do this because it's so much fun talking with everybody about it. It's great.
Sure. Well, to everybody who has been watching and joining us, thank you all so much for joining our very first virtual Dark Sky Festival. Please continue to check out festival events on our website at www.sequoiaparksconservancy.org/Dark Sky Festival. You'll see lots of events posted there. Follow our social media feeds for up-to-date information throughout the festival and fun posts. And if anybody has any follow-up questions for Terry or any of us here at SPC, please you can email us, you can visit our social media feeds, and we'll get those answers to you. And I think Jared just said something, Jared A just said something great in the chat. I'm going to share it, is that he said, curiosity, then persevere. And we are going to continue to do that. And we're excited to persevere through this. And we do have another live event today at 2 p.m. If anybody would like to join us, we're going to be talking to Dr. Jonathan Gardner from the NASA Web Experience at Goddard. And so if anybody wants to join us for that,
dial into that one. That's going to be awesome.
Yeah, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time and 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. Again, thank you everybody for joining, and hopefully we'll see you back here at 2 p.m.
Yeah, thank you guys. See you.
Bye. Bye, Terry.